I turned 20 years old in 3 days. 3 days from leaving this facility, and there are no stars in my eyes. It's a well-known rumor that TV studios in Hollywood sell their souls to the devil, and I can tell you that it's bullshit. Whatever you choose to believe in, I can assure you your favorite celebrities and artists are not kneeling in front of rotting goat heads and sacrificing their souls to the devil. Hollywood is disgusting, but it's more realistically gross. Just look at any headline or Twitter post where people soaked in privilege are getting their just desserts for thinking they can take advantage. However, when it comes to small towns and smaller studios, where people can get away with a lot more, that's where the line starts to blur. I'll start by prefacing that I never wanted to be on television. It was always my mom who was pushing for it when I was a little kid. I was 6 years old, and all I cared about was Power Rangers and the moon following me on a long car ride home. The TV studio used to be seen as the heart of our town. It was well known for local classics, one of which I was pushed into auditioning for. The Pirate King was a kids' reality TV show, now completely wiped from existence, that centered around a fictional pirate captain and his search for a crew. It definitely was not original, but there's something about pirates that excites little kids. There was a different group of kids every week, as well as a core ensemble of characters in each episode. I was part of that ensemble, the group of kids whose names were in the credits. I guess you could call us honorary crew members. We were yet to become pirates, and the ship was like our school. Now I started at the age of around 6 years old, so I had no idea what was going on at the start of the show. For my audition, I smiled my biggest smile and read off of a crumpled piece of paper and did exactly what my mother told me to do behind the camera. She wasn't confident that I got the part because I giggled too much during my reading, but according to the producer, he was looking for kids with a sense of humor and a sense of adventure. I guess that was me. Instead of kindergarten, I went to show tapings in the main studio, and sometimes we went on field trips to the actual sea to film scenes without a green screen. I originally only signed up to appear in a certain number of episodes. I played the youngest member of the crew, and according to the scripts, I was supposed to go and live my dream at the end of season 1. But when the show became popular among kids in our town, I guess our ensemble became familiar enough to keep. I grew up on the show. I had my 7th and then 8th birthday on set with my mother and all of the crew. These guys felt like my second family. It felt magical. I could turn on the television at home and see my own face among swashbuckling pirates. As I grew older, the storylines began to change. I started as the youngest member of the crew who just asked questions for the kids at home, and occasionally was kidnapped by the evil pirate of the week. I guess you could say the narrative grew with us. It started as a preschool-orientated show aimed at teaching little kids life lessons entwined in the pirate plot. But at the age of 7 and 8 years old, as our audience started to get a little older and expected a more kids against the adults storyline, our little group got our own storylines. Since we had grown up on the show, we started to control the narrative a lot more. Instead of asking questions for kids at home and getting kidnapped by rival pirates and saved by the random group of contestants who came on every week, we were written into the story with proper speaking lines. My first proper line after being more of a side character was greeting the audience. It felt good. Normally it was the Pirate King who jumped in front of us and waved at the huge camera in our faces. That time it was me. It was just a small line. All I got to say was, "Welcome to our ship." It was an adrenaline rush for a little kid. Mom replayed my part a bunch of times and kept her own version on a separate DVD to show to family and friends. "Ace is famous," she would gush at family gatherings, and I pretended not to see my cousins shooting me death glares across the table. I told them the Pirate King did not want them, and they took it personally. I meant it more as a compliment, because to be a crew member, you had to be a bad kid. And if you weren't bad, our crew taught contestants how to be the worst possible version of themselves to become a pirate. Sure, it was all fiction, and again, there were life lessons built into the story. At the end of the episode, the contestants were judged on the goodness meter and either joined our crew, pledging themselves to the king, or walked the plank. My cousins did not look or act like pirates. The two of them were upper middle class and wore pastel colors. attending things like brunch with their super-rich parents. I had told them that my crew would have pushed them off the plank or put them to work under the deck, though apparently saying that was bullying according to my aunt, and I was forced to apologize. I was protective of my special place on the crew though, so I don't blame for cousins for getting mad. I remember the producer coming over to my mother and asking her if I wanted to learn self-defense for a scene involving a mini fight among our little kid crew. It was only over a bag of candy and was more of a bit. However, after standing on the sidelines and watching the adults fight in choreographed sequences that looked straight out of a movie, I nodded before my mom could politely say no. Now, my mother may have wanted me to be on television, but she had a strict rule when I was in the studio. She made it clear to all crew members that I had to be standing far away from the swashbuckling, which was a health and safety rule anyway. But Mom liked to put her foot down. She was the only parent who insisted on staying on set when all the others left. When it came to me learning how to use weapons to take down my fictional enemies, she wrote a strongly worded letter to the crew that pretty much threatened their lives if I so much as poked myself in the eye with my fake sword. Being a group of 8-year-olds entrusted with very lifelike-looking swords, of course, I got my fair share of injuries when we thought it was a good idea to battle each other off camera. The sets were always janky-looking, but to me, it was like being on a real-life pirate ship. The Pirate King's ship had been built by hand and was the main set in a large green screen room. There was only one rule we had to follow during breaks, and that rule had been hammered into us over the years. Even contestants. No matter what we did, we had the whole backstage to play around and eat our lunches, as well as complete schoolwork if our parents had set us with it. But we could not go inside the back room for the crew. When we were 6, it was a polite suggestion. Now that we were older, however, and more curious and insistent on exploring, it had become a warning. We had our own special room where we got treats and our costumes fitted, so I never really thought about breaking that rule. Besides, I had my mom following me around the whole time, so it's not like I could sneak off with the other kids. I joined the Pirate King on the exact day the show was shut down and pulled from the air. I still remember that day vividly. I was so excited that I could barely contain myself on camera. We had been talking about it for weeks and going over the scripts over and over again. It was our pirate graduation, and our group were becoming full-time members of the Pirate King's crew. It was supposed to be a surprise to the audience. The contestants were judged on the goodness meter before the king turned to us with a wide smile. I remember being slightly intimidated by him in costume. It was his eyes that had scared me when I was a little kid, illuminated stars printed on his pupils like his eyes really were filled with starlight. None of us liked him at first. Some of the younger contestants screamed and freaked out when he got too close. His actor, however, made me laugh and gave me candy. The ceremony was short, and each of us were crowned with our very own pirate hat. We knelt on the ground one by one and pledged ourselves to the Pirate King. I remember our exact words. I, redacted, fully pledge myself as a member of the Pirate King's crew, and I will join him when I reach my given age. I wasn't sure what the last part was, but I said it anyway. I was so excited to start wearing the contact lenses in my eyes, giving them a starry effect just like the king. His eyes had always entranced me, and even knowing they were fake, I could pretend they were real in the moment. The episode ended with us waving goodbye to the contestants sailing away, wearing our newly minted pirate hats. When we finished up for lunch while the show's contestants were given a tour of the ship, I quickly realized there was no sign of my mother, which was odd. I was used to her familiar brunette bob visible in the crowd of people buzzing around me. I usually had lunch with Mom, so I stood around waiting for her. And that was when it hit me. I was 8 years old, and for the first time since I was a little kid, my mom wasn't there to baby me. Dude, it was like Christmas. I had the whole of lunch to myself. Mom didn't allow me to get food from the snack table, insisting on a healthy, packed lunch with no candy. So I was instantly drawn to it, grabbing as many blueberry cupcakes as I could. I was biting into one when I glimpsed them standing across the room in their usual group. Since my entire existence was controlled by my mom, I never got a chance to talk to the other kids playing the other members of the Pirate King's crew. Over the years, they had become close, like best friends, while my closest friend was my mother. The blueberry cupcake was suddenly a lot harder to swallow. They were supposed to be my best friends on the Pirate King. In reality, these kids were like the elementary school version of Mean Girls, the three of them leaning against the wall, glaring at me. They were still in costume, still in their pirate hats, while I had taken mine off. It was a little too big for my head. The other kids didn't seem to like that I had taken off my hat, shooting me very judging looks. The ringleader was Luke, a beloved favorite on the show, and a son figure to the king. He played a kid called Jinx, the troublemaker who sabotaged the contestants during the show. Luke had said maybe one word to me over the 3 years I had known him, and that had been move when shoving past me. Next to him stood Evangeline, who was Leia, the princess of the crew, and also the dumb blonde character who made intentional mistakes to make contestants look smarter. Evangeline imitated my lisp to the others one time, and I still hadn't forgiven her for it. Also, she had a weird thing about close proximity. If I was too close to her during fights, she would jump back with a squeak and yell, "Gross!" I later found out that it was because I owned a cat, and she was allergic to cats, allegedly. Behind her, with his mouth filled with candy, was Robbie, who played the nerd Bellamy, despite his real personality being the complete opposite. His glasses were fake, and he often complained about them, arguing with anyone without earplugs or the patience to deal with him. He had been a fairly nice kid when we were 6, but as we grew older, I guess his head got a little big. He and Luke were like brothers, but I could tell he envied Luke for being the most liked out of all of us. Robbie had tried to insist he didn't need glasses, though it was a big part of his nerd thing. "But I don't want to wear glasses," would be the usual soundtrack to my mornings, sitting outside his fitting room and listening to him moan and grumble and complain before storming out. Robbie was argumentative and often actively looked to cause a fight. I remember accidentally hitting him with my sword, and he shoved me onto my back, sticking the blade of his own fake sword into my throat as if he could actually cut my throat. These kids were pirates, all right. Sensing them already gunning to cause trouble, I wanted to turn around and walk away from them. But I was a kid, my mom was gone, and despite these kids being insufferable, part of me also wanted to fit in. I wanted to join in with their in-jokes and at least see them as real-life friends. It was well known that the three of them had been in hot water multiple times for exploring rooms that were out of bounds, or just throwing food at the camera crew and blaming it on oblivious contestants. I wanted to join in their antics. Before I could stop myself, I stuffed the cupcake in my mouth and strode over to them, trying to ignore the collective flinch they did, moving back like I had a contagious disease. "Hey!" I waved at them, gesturing behind me. I could tell from the feral looks on their faces that these kids were eager to cause a stir. Ever since they were forbidden to enter the staff kitchen at the age of 7, they were desperate to attract attention. The only way to stick out in front of them would be to throw away my kid morals. I mentally apologized to my mother for becoming a real-life pirate. "Do you want to go exploring?" Luke raised a brow, though he did look surprised. "Why?" He folded his arms, challenging me with a smile. "I thought you were having lunch with Mommy." The boy looked left and then right, his eyes wide, mocking mine from earlier. "Are you scared without her, Mommy's boy?" Evangeline giggled, and Robbie looked me up and down like I'd grown an additional limb. "Your pirate hat looks stupid." Evangeline blew a blonde braid out of her eyes. "Is your head too big for it?" "No." Ignoring her, I focused on the leader of their little group. "Well?" Luke shrugged, exchanging looks with the others like he was considering it. "Maybe," he said. "But it's going to be scary." His lips curled. "Or are you too chicken?" When I claimed 3 times that I was not a chicken, reminding him I was a pirate too, he looked me dead in the eye, ignoring a crew member behind me doing a head count of contestants. Apparently there was one missing. There was always one missing. Every so often a kid would get lost. It was always at lunch too. I would hear a name being called out, though I never recalled these kids being found. "Mia Ainsworth. Does anyone know where Mia is?" Luke mimicked the crew member's nasally voice until the man shot him a warning look before turning back to me. "We're going to sneak into the back room, if you want to play." The boy cocked his head. "Why do you never want to play with us?" He took a step towards me. Are you too good for us, Topper? I hated it when he called me by my pirate's name. It's Ace, I corrected him. My mom. He cut me off. Aren't you a little too old to still be wanting your mommy?
Yes, I swallowed hard. Good, he grinned. So come explore the scary back room with us. I couldn't help it, the words slipping out before I could stop them. But we're not allowed to go in there. So, Luke turned me around and forcefully shoved me forward with a laugh. I glimpsed a camera operator shoot him a wary look, and he charmed her with a grin. We're just playing, he chuckled, gesturing for the others to follow us. Luke was a good actor, even as an 8-year-old, keeping up with the wide smile and childlike innocent eyes until we pushed through the doors and out of the studio. Luke's grip tightened on my arm and I resisted a yell. I had left my sword in the studio, which would have come in handy to get him to back off. Now there were no adults to fool. He could be as rough as he wanted, his fingernails digging into the thick material of my costume. Okay, Topper, he said through a breathy giggle as we descended down rickety stairs. The studio had been built in an old building, and most of it was either out of bounds or converted into a set piece. I kept my eye out for my mother, who was nowhere to be seen when I most needed her. I had been begging her to let me play with the other kids and give me leeway since I learned what independence was. Now that she was gone, I wanted nothing more than her arms wrapped around me. Luke twisted around, tugging me further through an out-of-bounds area, which had been marked with bright yellow tape. The boy's eyes scared me. Why don't we call this your second graduation? Yes! Evangeline skipped ahead, doing a mocking courtesy with her costume skirt. You can go into the room and tell us all about it. Robbie grumbled something that sounded like, that's a good idea. And I caught a rare smile on his lips he was trying to hide. But you're the youngest, Ace. Evangeline joined in laughing. I was being bullied. I knew I was being bullied. Luke was pulling me like a rag doll, and Evangeline's smile was too big with far too many shiny teeth. Nope, you're doing it, Luke giggled. If you want to be part of our crew, you have to do the test. I tried to yank away from him, but he was stronger than I thought. What test? The pirate test, he said back in a sing-song. I had wondered several times over my 3 years on the show if Luke really was the son of a real-life swashbuckler. This was one of those moments that I was sure he was. I'm already part of the crew, and it's not even real, I gritted out, almost in tears when the three of them pulled me down a scary-looking hallway, one which I knew led to the infamous back room where crew members went during lunch. I could see it was slightly open, a warm glow emanating from inside. It looked like candlelight. I remember the thought grazing my mind. Did someone light a candle? Closer, and I could hear low voices. Luke started dragging me towards it, and I could sense his body vibrating with elation, his grip tightening on my arm. He was going to shove me in, and then the three of them were going to run. I was digging my feet into the ground, trying to throw the boy off of me when Luke's entire demeanor seemed to shift. He grabbed me roughly by my shoulders, but not to force me into the room. Instead, before I knew what was happening, I was being slammed against the wall, back first. When I opened my mouth to cry out, he slammed his hand over my attempted yell. I thought it was another one of his games before I realized he too was pressed against the wall, Evangeline and Robbie with their hands pressed over their mouths. I didn't understand what was happening until I caught Luke's wide eyes. He was trembling, shuddering against me. Don't move, his wide eyes told me, and I did my best to jerk my head in response. I thought we had been caught at first, but that didn't explain his and the others' reactions. He had seen something, and that something had terrified him. His eyes were far too wide, almost unseeing, his lips parting into what might have been a cry before he managed to swallow it and shake his head. I stayed still, gasping into his clammy hand. Luke turned to the three of us, his cheeks paling, and once again told us with his eyes, "I'm going to take a look." I read the words on his lips, and then we're going to run. He nodded at us, me included. Luke motioned for us to follow in his lead, and I swallowed my own strangled cry. If Luke was scared, then I didn't want to see whatever was through that door.
okay?" His gaze flicked to me before signaling with 2 fingers that we were going to run. I didn't notice it back then, but looking back, I think he was crying. He was terrified. Luke didn't want to look again. I could see it in the way he was twitching, his breaths coming out in short pants. Maybe he wasn't the son of a pirate after all. "Wait!" The word was choked in the back of my throat when he twisted around and peeked inside the room. I could tell from his body language his intentions were to check if we had been caught, and then turn to us and run. I counted my own shaky breaths when Luke didn't turn back to me, and in the corner of my eye, his shadow slowly bled away from the 3 of us. He stood on the threshold of the room, his arms dropping to his sides. I couldn't see his face, but I knew what had happened to him. Back when we first started at the age of 6 years old, the 4 of us were kidnapped by a group of rival pirates, and the contestants had to find us. The Pirate King called it the mind sickness, which turned our thoughts blurry, our brains into soup. With the mind sickness, we were under the control of our kidnappers. This was just like the mind sickness. But while that had been fake, and had taken a lot of patience not to giggle and show emotion on camera, this was something else entirely. When Luke stepped into the room slowly, seemingly stuck in a trance of mind sickness, I knew I had to grab him before he was taken again. Reality and fiction were no longer 2 separate things as I lunged forward to follow him. I don't know why I followed him, why my body seemed to act on its own, against my brain. I wondered if it was the mind sickness. Is this what it was? I could feel it, sense it, almost smell it. It was a pull I couldn't explain, phantom fingers creeping up my spine and taking hold, pushing me further towards it. When I followed Luke inside the room, I wasn't thinking of anything except my sudden overwhelming urge to join the Pirate King, and my pledge to him. I remember the room being filled with light, and the sight of it drawing the breath from my lungs. Luke dropped onto his knees in front of me. Robbie followed, and then Evangeline. I don't remember hitting the ground, just her. I never got to know the contestants because they were only here for a day, but this girl had stood out, a small girl with dark red hair pulled into pigtails. She was the only one noticeable in the crowd. I knew her name. It was in my throat and bubbling under my tongue. Mia. Her name had been called out earlier. I had always wondered why contestants who went missing were forgotten about. "You're not supposed to be in here." The mayor wasn't supposed to be in the room filled with blood. Next to him was the creator of the Pirate King. He said something, what sounded like a reassurance telling us to not be scared, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, not when my chest was being crushed, and I could feel this thing taking over me slowly. It was invisible, and yet I could see it, sense it in the air. I could see it splattering the walls and floor, a haunting smear of scarlet caught under candlelight. It didn't make sense to me that our mayor was on his knees in front of Mia, or what was left of Mia. I could see her body crumpled on the ground, while her pigtailed head was balanced on a wooden podium. Her eyes were still wide open, lips parted in a screech that was silenced. Instead of explaining why he was kneeling in front of a dead contestant's severed head, our mayor turned to us. His eyes were set, and I found myself drawn to the hollow look in his eyes, his writhing lips trying to coerce words. "Be kind to them." Without a word to us, he turned back to Mia's head and bowed his own. I don't think he could watch. "We are giving them to you after all." The mayor tipped his head back, his eyes flickering shut. "You promised. We give you your own, and you stop taking our children and then leave." I couldn't move. Even my breaths were frozen. I was paralyzed. "Not yet." The booming voice entered my head, invasive and painful. I could feel my body trembling underneath its crushing weight. I was forced onto my stomach, gasping into the old carpet. "I'm still hungry." The voice burrowed into my skull, and I could feel those phantom fingers stroking the raw meat of my brain. I screamed, but I couldn't move. I couldn't open my mouth, my lips gaping, gasping into dust, choking my lungs. It retracted instantly, and when it did, the feeling returned to my body, only for this presence to take hold of me and force my head up. Next to me, Luke made a squeaking sound. His head was thrown back, enough to snap his neck, teasing it, before letting him go. Still, my mouth filled with bugs writhing on my tongue, creeping down the bare flesh of my arms as the voice wound its way around the four of us, bleeding into our ears, getting a taste of us. When my lips opened and I mimicked it, the others in sync, my own words were violently torn away. Hungry. Eat, Nibiru! The mayor's voice made me jump. It was human and real. Nothing like what was suffocating my skull. Nibiru. The name sent shivers sliding down my spine. The Pirate King. But he wasn't real, right? I knew he wasn't real. As you can see, we are keeping our side of the bargain. His voice shook. Our ancestors were cruel to you in the past. But please, have mercy on them.
He caught himself. That is, until they are ready, of course. You said you would leave the other children alone. Mercy! I could taste blood in the back of my mouth and pooling down my chin when the pressure was back. This time a sharp pain in the back of my head. Mercy! It mocked. The thing laughed, and I felt every hitch of its breath shake the ground beneath us, bringing the light fixtures crashing to the ground. Mayor Weathers bowed his head, and just like that, the thing was slipping from mine. I saw its movement in the way the candles flickered, flames dancing from side to side. The sound of chewing brought me back to fruition piece by piece. I could breathe again. I could blink my eyes, and still pressed against the ground, I could see Mia's head trembling under the weight of the thing hovering over it. The force did not waste time. It wouldn't let me see it. When I tried to, it was back inside my head. Not yet, it said again, before returning to its meal. I watched it strip away the flesh and hair first, a phantom tongue delving into the cavern of the girl's skull and chewing its way through pinkish mush. With it distracted, the mayor took his chance and got to his feet, turning around and motioning for us to leave. I tried to. I forced myself to sit up, but I couldn't stop looking at Mia's head disappearing piece by piece as invisible bites became bigger and hungrier, a monstrous tumor eating its way through her face. A shadow loomed over me, and I recognized it as Luke. But he ignored me, instead taking stumbling steps towards thin air, and yet both of us knew there was something there. Something eating its way into Mia's skull. Something hiding behind the facade of the Pirate King. There was a look in Luke's eyes that I did not like. There was something in his eyes, driving him closer and closer to the king. It was no longer mind sickness. I could see the twitch in the boy's lips, entranced eyes glued to dancing candlelight. I had never seen that expression on his face. It was excitement and curiosity in one. A daring smile starting to take over his mouth. There was something in Luke's eyes, not yet taken shape, an ignition. It hit me in a wave of dizziness, sending my thoughts plunging deep down, that maybe I could follow him. What is going on here? The voice was like cool water coming over me. A comfort I didn't think I would ever feel again. Mom was standing in the doorway, and I wish I could have turned around. I wish I didn't stay frozen, squeezing my eyes shut. I was aware of my mom's sharp cry, and then her warm arms wrapping around me, attempting to pull me to my feet. I wanted to hold on to her, to tell her I was scared, that I wanted to go home. But no sooner had her warmth found me before it was slipping away. I didn't get to see her face, and I think that was a mercy. I didn't see my mother come apart in front of me. I just felt her wash over me, thick and red and warm, splashing me in the face. When I opened my eyes, my mom was gone, and I could sense that monstrous tumor, that mouth, beginning to chew through the mushy red coating on the ground beneath me. Time didn't make sense for a long time after that. I saw the red and blue flashing of sirens. I saw the sheriff's face inches from my own. "Ace!" He was yelling. He slapped me twice. I could read his lips. "It's going to be okay!" He forced me to look at him, and I did, blinking back tears. I could still feel her. She was all over me, paining me, staining me. This time the sheriff spoke slowly, drawing out every word. "It is going to be okay." Without Mom, it wasn't. I was alone with nobody but the other kids.
and a town that wanted me dead. The world seemed to move without me. I was standing outside the studio, and then I was in the back of an ambulance, a warm blanket thrown over me. Evangeline and Robbie were sitting opposite me, wide-eyed and staring into an oblivion only they could see. Sound came rushing back to me when I was standing on a white corridor, and Luke's yell came from behind me. "I'm fine!" There were 3 people in white crowding him. One of them a man who was forcefully holding his eyes open and shining a bright light in his face. He snarled at them, "I told you I'm fine!" The same people looked into my eyes the following day when I had stopped screaming and trying to tear off my own skin. I could still feel her, even wearing fresh clothes. It took me several days to realize I was not in the emergency room. This place was a labyrinth of doors that led to nowhere, and scary-looking people carrying clipboards. The first time I was tested for starry eyes, I was met with hopeful smiles. Call it witness protection for kids who were marked by gods. They told us no matter what happened, we would be looked after. 11 years later, I know the consequences of keeping us past our expiration date. I feel it in earthquakes under my feet. The town is crumbling outside this facility under the fury of a god who did not get what he wanted and was taking it out on innocent people. I turned 12 when the first wave came, a disease that wiped out half of the kindergarten. The second wave was earthquakes. The third, a barrier stopping townspeople from escaping. We lost Robbie 5 years ago. At the age of 15 years old, his starry eyes came early. Since 8 years old, I have been told that my pledge to the Pirate King was real, and was in fact to a god, Nibiru, who has been feasting on our town's children, both body and existence. In the late 1500s, our town begged him to save their dying women, and he did, in return for children. Since then, he has kept coming back, hungrier each time. When I pledged myself to him at the age of 8 years old, I did not tie my fate to becoming his meal. Instead, I am to become his right hand, or I guess part of his pirate crew, and starry eyes will be the first sign that he's pulling me over to his side. Every day since being brought here, they check my eyes 3 times a day. Robbie escaped 5 years ago, and his giving in stopped the endless earthquakes. But his sacrifice didn't stop the daily executions which show up on the TV screens. For every day we are not handed over to him, another innocent townsperson's head is severed from their body. Last week, Evangeline didn't turn up to class, where we learn about Nibiru and his effects on us. Water, moonlight, and the sea are 3 main instigators in capturing us, so we drink water blindfolded, and there are no windows inside this facility. The sea is blocked out, mostly through headphones we have to wear at all times, so it gets lonely. Evangeline locked herself in her room and refused to come out. When orderlies dragged her out, kicking and screaming, I saw Evangeline's eyes. Stars, beautiful stars printed on her pupils marked by a god. I could see his presence already taking hold of her, turning her expression feral and monstrous, her lips pulled into a wide grin. She turned 20 years old last week, and each day she was free, that pull was stronger, and her mentality started to crumble, until she started to close herself off from Luke and me, insisting that she had a headache and giving us a sad, knowing smile. I don't think she was stupid enough to look into a glass of water or take out her earplugs. I think Nibiru found her himself. I can hear him! Now a shadow of herself, Evangeline was a blur of gold curls. She never got cut, her body convulsing as she fought wildly, squealing like a banshee when they pulled her down the hallway. Ace! Her cry almost sent me to my knees. It was laced with that exact force that had crushed my lungs at 8 years old. Ace, can you hear him? She escaped a day later, after ripping an orderly's eyes out. Luke came to see me last night. When I woke up, he was looming over me, sunglasses shading his eyes, earplugs corked in, still in his pajamas. I knew he didn't have starry eyes. If he did, Luke would be proudly bearing them. He was already jealous that the others had been marked before him, and did everything in his power to catch moonlight or hear the sea. We were 10 when he tried to stick his head out of the window to hear the ocean, and was grounded for a week. Are we worth it? He asked, hanging over me with his hands behind his back, lips pulled into a smirk. I knew that wasn't Luke speaking. The Pirate King had already taken him a long time ago. "What?" He leaned back, expression darkening. "You heard me?" I could hear the Pirate King's voice twisted around his. "Are we really worth it?" The ground shook, and I grasped onto my bedsheets, holding on for dear life. Luke's smile was cruel, but there was a part of him I still believed was still in there, fighting against the Pirate King's grasp on his mind. With a two-fingered salute, he left me with that question burning in my brain. Were we worth it? The alarms went off this morning. I knew it was Luke escaping. It's been quiet ever since he left. Nobody has come to check my eyes. This time it was Evangeline doing the honors, dressed in the filthy rags of her old costume, her pirate hat nestled on her head. I turned it off when she started screaming with laughter, throwing the severed head into a crowd of horrified-looking faces. I saw my cousins among them, glaring at the camera as if looking directly at me. When the crowd parted down the middle for a newly converted Luke wearing his costume, his pirate hat perfectly sitting on his head of curls, and the manic stars in his eyes lighting up the dim morning, I destroyed my TV. Maybe the bastard was right. The people here are insistent on keeping us from him, but to throw a whole town away for 4 kids? It doesn't make sense. 3 days and I join them, and maybe he will leave our town alone. There's no such thing as selling your soul to the devil. Being marked, claimed by a god, however, if I listen carefully, I can hear him, riding on the waves of the sea, calling out to me. He is gentle and lulling. The Pirate King wants me to finally come home and join his crew. Can you hear him?